So we were going to talk about the tiara.
Were we?
Yeah.
I thought it said no.
I know, but I just think it would look so fabulous if you
Yeah, but
did.
I've only got little tiny tiaras. They're not really worth it.
The meeting was supposed to settle a private question about jewelry. Instead, it reopened one of the monarchy's most dangerous emotional wounds. Camilla entered expecting an inventory review and left before it was finished. The reason was a single name buried inside the ownership papers. Diana's private vault had not passed into general royal control, nor had it been placed under the king. The documents showed something far more explosive. It had been signed over to Princess Anne. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla watched the jeweler open the final file as Charles and William remained silent beside her. Princess Anne did not reach for the papers. She simply waited. The private jewelry review, a closed examination, used to establish which pieces were personally owned and which belonged to wider royal holdings, had been expected to end with technical answers. Instead, the jeweler read from the documented account and stated that Diana's sealed private vault, its inventory, and its control rights had been formally assigned to Anne. Camilla cut him off. She asked why Anne's name appeared on property tied so intimately to Diana, and the room changed. Charles tried to steady the exchange, but the queen consort looked from the king to William and found no immediate denial. That silence hurt more than argument. Anne spoke, telling her that she had never asked for the responsibility, yet she would not pretend the signed arrangement did not exist. Her calmness made the moment sharper, not softer. William leaned toward the file when the jeweler produced a second piece of evidence, a handwritten authorization stored separately from the main inventory. The prince asked when it had been signed. The date stopped him. Whoever created the arrangement had not acted casually. The instruction appeared designed to survive a future dispute over Diana's possessions. Charles stared at the page, then asked everyone to remain calm while the jeweler explained the wording. Camilla rose before he could continue. She pushed her chair back and told Charles she would not sit through what she saw as a deliberate humiliation. The king called her name, but she walked out and closed the door behind her. Anne remained seated. William did not move. Then William asked the question Camilla had not stayed to hear. Who had ordered Diana's private vault placed specifically in Anne's hands, and why had the structure been created so that Camilla could never simply take control? Camilla had escaped the room, but not the consequences. Anne's name was only the first surprise buried inside Diana's vault. A vault can hold diamonds, pearls, letters, and receipts. But this one held something far more volatile: memory. For Anne, it represented a duty she had never publicly discussed. For William, it carried the remnants of his mother. For Charles, it forced two eras of his life into the same room. And for Camilla, discovering that Diana's possessions had been deliberately placed beyond her reach, turned a jewelry review into something painfully personal. Princess Anne had never treated Diana's collection like ceremonial treasure waiting to be displayed. She understood it as private inheritance, meaning possessions belonging to an individual or family, rather than the monarchy as an institution. That distinction mattered, because once personal jewelry entered regular royal use, its original meaning could slowly become blurred. Anne's role was therefore not glamorous. She was not being handed jewels to wear, she was being handed a responsibility to protect them. William felt that responsibility more deeply than anyone else in the room. The prince did not see gemstones first. He remembered family photographs, childhood occasions, small moments connected to his mother that nobody outside the family could fully understand. Diana's belongings represented fragments of a life that had ended too soon, and he feared that if the collection became absorbed into ordinary royal management, memory would be replaced by protocol. Charles understood both sides, and that made his position almost unbearable. The king could see why Anne's control protected Diana's legacy, but he also knew exactly how the arrangement looked to Camilla. His wife had walked out believing she had been singled out, and he knew that defending the documents too forcefully could deepen her humiliation. Yet challenging them would place him directly against William, reopening wounds he had spent years trying to contain. Camilla sat alone after leaving the meeting, replaying the same thought again and again. Anne had been trusted, she had not. The queen consort could tell herself that the arrangement was administrative, but emotionally, it felt like something far harsher. Diana's memory still carried enormous force within the family, and being excluded from her private possessions felt like being reminded that some boundaries around the past had never disappeared. Anne finally spoke to William without Charles interrupting. She told him through their private conversation that this was not the first time she had seen the authorization. She had known about it for years. The Princess Royal, the traditional title held by the monarch's eldest daughter, explained that she had been instructed not to exercise control unless ownership of the collection was formally challenged. Then the jeweler added the detail that changed everything again. His documented review showed that Anne's authority came with strict limits over who could inspect, loan, move, or reclassify individual pieces. The wording was designed to stop Diana's private jewelry from quietly becoming ordinary crown jewelry, meaning pieces managed for official royal use rather than personal family ownership. Charles looked up immediately and asked when those restrictions had been written. The answer pointed back to one private royal gathering years earlier, when a seemingly minor request involving one of Diana's jewels had turned into something much more serious. That night, a line was crossed, and from that moment forward, Anne's role was no longer a possibility. It became a safeguard. Years before the jewelers opened that file, there had been another room, another disagreement, and another piece of jewelry carrying Diana's shadow. At the time, it seemed like an uncomfortable family dispute that would eventually be forgotten. It was not forgotten. One conversation after a private Windsor dinner convinced key members of the family that Diana's personal collection needed a guardian, someone powerful enough to say no, disciplined enough not to exploit it, and close enough to the throne to make that refusal matter. William had already grown uneasy about how easily the boundaries around his mother's belongings could blur. Some pieces were sentimental family possessions, others carried historic importance. A few could potentially appear at official engagements. That distinction mattered, because royal jewelry used for public duties can slowly become associated with the institution rather than the person who once owned it. The prince feared that Diana's private story could gradually be swallowed by ceremony. Princess Anne had noticed the same problem, but she handled it differently. She never asked to wear Diana's jewels and repeatedly pushed for careful ownership checks before anything was moved. Her restraint caught William's attention. Anne was not sentimental in public, yet she refused to treat the collection as available treasure. The princess understood that once one uncertain piece entered regular use, arguments over the rest would become almost inevitable. Camilla changed everything during a private Windsor dinner. The queen consort asked whether a sapphire piece closely associated with Diana might eventually return at an official royal engagement. William objected immediately. He told her that not everything connected to his mother should be absorbed into the monarchy's working collection simply because it carried royal history. Camilla pushed back, arguing that preserving an item did not necessarily mean keeping it permanently hidden. Anne ended the exchange before it grew worse. She said the sapphire should remain untouched until its ownership was beyond dispute. Camilla fell quiet, clearly feeling corrected in front of the family. William said little afterward, but he understood what had just happened. Anne had drawn the boundary nobody else had been willing to draw, and she had done it without trying to claim Diana's memory for herself. Charles met Anne privately after dinner, with no aides present. According to the later documented account attached to the transfer papers, she warned him that Diana's private holdings needed formal separation before every future jewelry decision became a personal battle between William, Camilla, and the monarchy itself. The king understood the danger. Once emotion and ownership became mixed, every necklace or brooch could reopen the same wound. Within days, Charles allowed paperwork to begin establishing Anne as custodian of the sealed collection. A custodian is simply the person legally trusted to protect and control property without personally owning it. The arrangement converted private concern into enforceable boundaries. Anne could never have predicted who would eventually challenge them. Years later, Camilla would sit directly across from her, as those safeguards were finally activated. And this time, neither woman would be able to retreat behind silence. The old dinner had created the protection. The newly opened file was about to turn that protection into confrontation. Camilla had walked out once, but anger did not allow her to stay away. Before the jewelers could finish reviewing the restrictions, she returned, and this time she was no longer interested in paperwork. She wanted an answer from Anne herself. Why had Diana's possessions been placed in her hands? Why had nobody warned the queen? and beneath both questions lay the accusation nobody wanted spoken aloud. Was this protection of Diana or protection from Camilla? Camilla returned after several minutes and asked the jewelers to leave the room. Charles hesitated, knowing the discussion was no longer about ownership alone, but Princess Anne agreed immediately. The specialists stepped away, leaving the family without any professional buffer between them. What had begun as an inventory review had become something far more dangerous, a confrontation about trust, memory, and who had been allowed to stand closest to Diana's private legacy. Anne did not defend herself emotionally. She told Camilla that she had never requested control of the vault and had never treated the collection as her own. Her authority existed only to prevent pieces from being altered, borrowed, transferred, or reclassified without the conditions attached to Diana's private instructions being met. The Queen Consort listened, but the explanation only sharpened the question she had returned to ask. Camilla faced Anne directly. She wanted to know whether the princess had ever believed she would misuse Diana's jewelry. Anne paused before answering. According to the private family account later attached to the review, she told her that the safeguard had never been built around personal intentions. It had been created because circumstances change, pressure builds, and boundaries disappear when nobody has the power to enforce them. Camilla heard something colder beneath those words. She told Anne that after years inside the family, discovering a formal structure deliberately placed beyond her influence felt like being told she had never been completely trusted. Charles tried to interrupt, but his wife stopped him. This was no longer about one sapphire, one vault, or one meeting. For her, it had become a judgment. Anne finally disclosed the strongest restriction. She could not simply hand control to Charles, Camilla, or even claim ownership herself. The transfer contained a succession mechanism, meaning a legal instruction deciding who assumes responsibility if the current guardian can no longer serve. Under that clause, control moved toward Diana's direct family line, rather than automatically returning to the monarch. William understood before anyone else spoke. The prince realized Anne had never been intended as the final destination. She was the bridge. Her role was to protect Diana's possessions, until her sons or their descendants could take greater responsibility under the written conditions. Camilla turned toward Charles, clearly expecting him to reject the arrangement. The king did not. Instead, Charles looked at Anne and asked the one question that changed the argument completely. Did I know about this when it was signed? The confrontation had exposed Camilla's wound. Now Charles was about to discover whether the barrier dividing his family carried his own approval. For several seconds, nobody answered the king. Then the jeweler was called back. The authorization was reopened, and Charles saw what time had buried. His own acknowledgement appeared within the supporting papers. He had not given Diana's vault to Anne, but years earlier he had recognized the arrangement and allowed it to stand. Suddenly, Camilla's anger could no longer be directed only at the Princess Royal. The decision she considered an exclusion had survived because Charles himself had chosen not to destroy it. Charles asked the jeweler to explain the structure plainly. The specialist pointed to the custodial authority, the legal power to guard and administer property without personally owning it, and confirmed that Anne's control was limited by Diana's original ownership conditions. Buckingham Palace could not simply absorb the vault into normal royal management, and Camilla could not override it by rank. The collection had been separated deliberately, so private family property could not become institutional property through convenience. Charles read the supporting page again. The king's earlier acknowledgement was unmistakable. Anne would remain responsible unless the succession conditions written into the transfer were triggered. He had not created the arrangement, but he had accepted it. That distinction offered little comfort. He remembered why he had done so. At the time, containing arguments over Diana's possessions seemed wiser than allowing every jewel to become another emotional battlefield. Camilla understood the implication immediately. She told Charles that Anne's authority was no longer the deepest wound. The queen consort could accept that safeguards existed, but learning her husband had known enough to challenge them, and chose silence, felt like something else entirely. She asked why he had never warned her. Charles answered carefully, saying he had believed the arrangement might never need to be invoked. His explanation only exposed how badly that assumption had failed. Anne listened before offering the reasoning preserved in the documented account attached to the authorization. She had been selected precisely because she could resist pressure from everyone involved. Charles could not easily command her. William could not emotionally sway her. Camilla could not claim precedence over her. Courtiers, jewelers, and future royal administrators would all face the same obstacle. The protection worked because Anne's responsibility was designed to be difficult to bend. Then the jeweler turned another page, and the room tightened again. The inventory referred not only to jewelry, but also to sealed correspondence, explaining the provenance, the documented history of who owned an object, and how it passed between people of several deeply personal pieces. Those letters contained instructions about future handling, and they could settle disputes that had lingered quietly for years. Anne made the decision before anyone could soften it. Because the vault's ownership had now been formally challenged, the instructions required a full review. Any piece whose status remained uncertain would be withdrawn from royal use until its history was confirmed. Charles looked at Camilla. William looked at Anne. The argument had just become real. What began as a painful question of trust was now about to affect actual royal jewelry, because Anne's first withdrawals would show everyone exactly how much power the old transfer still carried. The next blow did not arrive through an argument. It arrived through a list. Anne sat beside the jewelers, as several pieces were marked for immediate review, temporarily removing them from circulation until Diana's private instructions could be matched against their provenance. No shouting followed. That made the consequences feel colder. Camilla had feared that the vault represented an old judgment about her place in the family. Now that judgment seemed to be producing real boundaries in the present. Princess Anne authorized a temporary hold on every piece whose ownership history overlapped with Diana's private inventory. The hold a formal pause preventing an item from being loaned, moved, or scheduled for use did not mean anything had been permanently reassigned. But palace staff could no longer treat those jewels as available for engagements. Anne signed the instruction knowing exactly how quickly an old disagreement had become a present-day restriction. William supported the review, but he drew a line of his own. The prince told Charles that he did not want the process turned into punishment for Camilla. He wanted facts, not revenge. Diana had been his mother before she became a symbol, and that mattered, because every uncertain piece carried the risk of becoming another family argument. Charles understood him. The king also knew that protecting those instructions would now hurt his wife in ways nobody could disguise. Camilla received the revised jewelry list alone. The queen consort scanned the entries and immediately noticed several familiar references had disappeared from availability. She folded the paper once, then placed it face down. For the first time, the vault was no longer an old document or an insult she could argue against. It had changed what she could actually use. Charles came to her without aids. He told Camilla that honoring Diana's written wishes was not the same as rejecting her. She answered quietly that documents could make that distinction cleanly, but people could not. The king tried to reassure her, yet both understood the problem. Every removed piece now carried emotional meaning far beyond its value. Anne found the most sensitive item during the inventory review. A sapphire and diamond piece carried a sealed instruction stating that it should remain connected to Diana's descendants rather than enter ordinary royal rotation. The instruction had been preserved within the documented jewelry record, giving the restriction a clear source and purpose. William assumed that settled the matter. He suggested the piece should simply pass directly to his family. Anne refused. She told the prince that protecting Diana's wishes meant obeying every clause, not choosing whichever outcome felt emotionally satisfying. Until the conditions were met exactly, the sapphire would stay where it was. William stared at her differently after that. Anne had just denied him the very access she had defended against everyone else. Later that evening, William asked to speak with her alone. The fallout had revealed Anne's authority. Their private conversation would reveal why she had carried Diana's burden for years without ever using it for herself. There were no jewelers in the room now, no advisors, no king, no Camilla, just William and Anne, sitting with a responsibility neither had asked to inherit. For the first time since the vault was opened, the conversation stopped being about power. William wanted to know why his aunt had accepted the burden at all. Anne could have refused. Instead, she had protected a collection that constantly revived one of the family's most painful histories, and had done so without telling him for years. William asked the question directly. Had Princess Anne accepted control because she distrusted Charles or Camilla? The prince did not want another legal explanation. He wanted the truth behind the decision. The private conversation mattered because Diana's jewelry had become more than inheritance. It had become a test of whether family memory could survive without being pulled into old rivalries. Anne answered carefully. She told William that Diana's possessions needed someone standing outside the emotional center of the conflict. Charles carried decades of history. Camilla carried unavoidable comparison. William carried grief that no document could remove. Anne believed she could guard the pieces without needing them to prove anything about herself. Her job was not to claim Diana's legacy. It was to stop everyone else from reshaping it. William admitted something harder. He was angry. The prince had spent years believing certain questions surrounding his mother's possessions remained unresolved, only to discover that safeguards had existed all along. He told Anne that being protected from conflict was not the same as being trusted with the truth. She accepted the criticism without defending herself. Anne then spoke about her own resentment. According to the private account later recorded for the family review, she admitted that the responsibility had often felt like carrying an argument that belonged to other people. Every decision could make Charles suspicious, Camilla wounded, or William defensive. Yet walking away would have allowed convenience to decide what happened to Diana's possessions, and that was exactly what the arrangement had been created to prevent. Anne finally explained the part William had not fully understood. Her authority had always been transitional, meaning temporary control designed to last only until the intended beneficiaries could receive individual pieces under the written conditions. Diana's descendants had always been the destination. Anne was never meant to inherit the collection for herself. She was meant to hold the line until the right moment arrived. William changed course immediately. Instead of demanding access, he asked Anne to complete the review exactly as written. The prince told her not to bend the rules for him simply because he was Diana's son. That choice altered everything. Anne was no longer merely the woman standing between the family and the vault. She now had William's support to finish what she had protected for years. Charles learned of the decision soon afterward, and the king understood the danger at once. The family finally had clarity inside the palace, but outside it, Camilla's walkout was already becoming the story. And once that image reached the public, private truth would have to fight a much louder version of events. The public never saw the documents. They did not hear Anne explain the restrictions or William defend the review. What they saw was much simpler. Camilla leaving before the meeting ended. Within hours, that single departure had swallowed every complicated detail surrounding Diana's vault. A private inheritance dispute became a national conversation about memory, legitimacy, and the woman whose influence over the monarchy remained extraordinary, even decades after her death. Charles knew the palace had lost control of the story the moment correspondents learned that the jewelry review had ended abruptly. The king approved a short explanation saying the dispute concerned private family property, not royal rank. That distinction mattered because the vault was governed by personal ownership instructions, not by the hierarchy of the crown. William supported the statement, but he insisted Diana's wishes could not be watered down simply to make the headlines easier to manage. Camilla watched the coverage privately and understood what had happened to her. The queen consort had become one moment, the woman who walked out. Her reasons, her anger, and the years of complicated history behind them had been compressed into a symbol of defeat. She knew the public was no longer debating only jewelry. They were debating whether Diana's memory still carried enough force to shape the monarchy from beyond the grave. Anne reacted differently. Princess Anne felt uneasy as commentators began describing her as the winner of a battle she had never wanted to fight. She told William in a recorded family conversation preserved for the review that protecting Diana's belongings was never meant to create another rivalry between royal women. The prince agreed. If the story became Anne against Camilla, then the purpose of the safeguards would be lost beneath spectacle. Buckingham Palace became the focus by evening. A small crowd gathered outside as broadcasters repeated the same breaking details, and one late newspaper front page captured the entire scandal in 5 words. Diana's vault. Anne held the key. The photograph beneath it showed Camilla leaving, and that single image hardened the public narrative. For many watching, the vault no longer looked like treasure. It looked like something that had required protection. William noticed the conversation shifting. The prince heard more discussion about why Diana's private possessions needed such strict boundaries, and less about who had humiliated whom. Anne's refusal to wear, claim, or immediately redistribute the jewelry suddenly mattered. Her restraint explained why she had been chosen in the first place. Charles understood they had reached the final moment. The king decided anonymous statements would not settle what had become a family reckoning. He summoned Camilla, Anne, and William for one last private meeting. The world had already chosen its headline. Now the family had to choose its verdict. The final meeting was quieter than the first. No one stormed in. No one walked out. The same documents lay on the table, but the people around them had changed. Charles understood what his old acknowledgement meant. William understood why Anne had kept silent. Camilla understood that the vault was never going to be hers to control, and Anne understood that preserving Diana's wishes now required something harder than guarding jewelry. She had to close a family conflict without pretending the pain had never existed. Charles spoke first. The king confirmed that the existing transfer would be honored in full, and that Diana's private vault would remain under Princess Anne's custodial authority. Custodial authority meant the legal responsibility to protect and manage the collection without becoming its personal owner. Every item would remain governed by its original written conditions until the pieces meant for Diana's descendants could be transferred properly. Charles did not leave room for another argument. William supported him immediately. The prince asked Anne to complete the inventory without giving special treatment to anyone, including himself. That mattered because it removed the easiest accusation against her. She was not guarding the vault to oppose Camilla, and she was not protecting William because he was Diana's son. Anne was following the same rules for everyone, even when those rules caused pain. Camilla finally addressed what she had done. The queen consort admitted that walking out had allowed anger to speak before she understood the full arrangement. She did not pretend the discovery no longer hurt. It did. But she accepted that Diana's possessions were not a judgment on her marriage to Charles. The king listened without interrupting, understanding that accepting the boundary did not erase the humiliation she had felt. Anne answered without triumph. Princess Anne told Camilla that the safeguard had never been created to erase her place in the present. It existed to stop the present from rewriting ownership belonging to the past. Camilla accepted that distinction quietly. For the first time, the two women were no longer fighting over what the vault represented. Charles placed his hand on the folder and pushed it toward Anne. "The matter is settled," the king said. No piece from Diana's private collection would enter ordinary royal circulation unless its written conditions allowed it. Anything intended for her descendants would remain protected until the proper moment arrived. Camilla left calmly this time. Anne kept responsibility without claiming Diana's legacy as her own. William finally knew his mother's private history could not simply be absorbed by the institution. And Charles accepted the hardest truth of all. Protecting his present marriage did not require rewriting the life that came before it. Diana's vault remained locked, but its purpose was finally clear. It was never a weapon against Camilla, and never a prize for Anne. It was a boundary created so memory, inheritance, and family could not be rewritten by whoever held power next. Camilla's walkout exposed that boundary. Anne's restraint preserved it, and the monarchy finally allowed Diana's private legacy to remain where it belonged, protected, respected, and preserved for her family. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.